Absence of thought is indeed a powerful factor in human affairs, statistically speaking the most powerful, not just in the conduct of the many but in the conduct of all. To think and to be fully alive are the same. There are no dangerous thoughts. Thinking itself is dangerous. It is a strange desire to seek power and to lose liberty. Read not to contradict and confute, nor to believe and take for granted, nor to find talk and discourse, but to weigh and consider. If a man will begin with certainties, he shall end in doubts, but if he will be content to begin with doubts, he shall end in certainties. All colors will agree in the dark. I carry my thoughts about with me for a long time, often for a very long time, before writing them down. The aim of education should be to teach us rather how to think, than what to think, rather to improve our minds, so as to enable us to think for ourselves, than to load the memory with thoughts of other men. Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in anything simply because it is spoken and rumored by many. Do not believe in anything merely on the authority of your teachers and elders. Reading without reflecting is like eating without digesting. An intellectual is someone whose mind watches itself. The fact is that if you have not developed language, you simply don't have access to most of human experience. And if you don't have access to experience, then you're not going to be able to think properly. Democratic societies can't force people. Therefore, they have to control what they think. To know what you know and what you do not know, that is true knowledge. To study and not think is futile. To think and not study is dangerous. Acquire new knowledge whilst thinking over the old, and you may become a teacher of others. Discovery is the ability to be puzzled by simple things. It is all right to say exactly what you think if you have learned to think exactly. Thinking is the hardest work in the world, and most of us will go to great lengths to avoid it. The highest possible stage in moral culture is when we recognize that we ought to control our thoughts. The most important attitude that can be formed is that of desire to go on learning. We only think when we are confronted with a problem. We do not learn from experience. We learn from reflecting on experience. Education is a social process. Education is growth. Education is not preparation for life but is life itself. Anyone who has begun to think places some portion of the world in jeopardy. Genius was 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. Any intelligent fool can make things bigger, more complex, and more violent. It takes a touch of genius and a lot of courage to move in the opposite direction. I think and think for months and years. 99 times, the conclusion is false. The 100th time I'm right. The most incomprehensible thing about the world is that it is comprehensible. Everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. To raise new questions, new possibilities, to regard old problems from a new angle requires creative imagination and marks real advances in science. Intellect annuls fate. So far as a man thinks, he is free. What is the hardest task in the world? To think. Be careful that you write accurately rather than much. The force of the temptation which urges us to seek for such evidence and appearances as are in favor of our desires, and to disregard those which oppose them, is wonderfully great. If you have knowledge, let others light their candle by it. Thinking is the hardest work there is, which is the probably reason why so few engage in it. Anyone who stops learning is old, whether at 20 or 80. Anyone who keeps learning stays young. All truly wise thoughts have been thought already thousands of times, but to make them truly ours, we must think them over again honestly, till they take root in our personal experience. Irrationally held truths may be more harmful than reasoned errors. The heart of man is made to reconcile the most glaring contradictions. There are two ways to slide easily through life: to believe everything or to doubt everything. Both ways save us from thinking. Blind commitment to a theory is not an intellectual virtue, it is an intellectual crime. New opinions are always suspected, and usually opposed, without any other reason but because they are not already common. You see, but you do not observe. It is a mistake to confound strangeness with mystery. What is written without effort is in general read without pleasure. He who has imagination without learning has wings and no feet. The ultimate court of appeal is observation and experiment, not authority. A great many people think they are thinking when they are merely rearranging their prejudices. Genius means little more than the faculty of perceiving in an unhabitual way. A problem well stated is a problem half solved. Creativity takes courage. He who establishes his argument by noise and command shows that his reason is weak. As often as a study is cultivated by narrow minds, they will draw from it narrow conclusions. The logic of science is the logic of business and life. What might understand by philosopher a terrible explosive in the presence of which everything is in danger. I don't know what I may seem to the world, but as to myself, I seem only to have been like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself in now and then finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me. The great composer does not set to work because he is inspired, but becomes inspired because he is working. You need chaos in your soul to give birth to a dancing star. Only the mind cannot be sent into exile. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. Man is but a reed, the weakest in nature, but he is a thinking reed. The best way to have a good idea is to have lots of ideas. Men never do evil so completely and cheerfully as when they do it from religious conviction. Philosophical habits of mind do not come quicker through fiber optics. Clear thinking is not aided by better dot resolution. Understanding ourselves and feeling for others does not come with a software upgrade. All life is problem solving. No rational argument will have a rational effect on a man who does not want to adopt a rational attitude. Good tests kill flawed theories. We remain alive to guess again. Problems are to the mind what exercise is to the muscles. They toughen and make strong. If everyone is thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking. Science is built up of facts, as a house is built of stones, but an accumulation of facts is no more a science than a heap of stones is a house. Where observation is concerned, chance favors only the prepared mind. The artist is a receptacle for emotions that come from all over the place, from the sky, from the earth, from a scrap of paper, from a passing shape, from a spider's web. Thinking is like living or dying. Each of us must do it for himself. Not to be absolutely certain is, I think, one of the essential things in rationality. To acquire immunity to eloquence is of the utmost importance to the citizens of a democracy. To understand the actual world as it is, not as we should wish it to be, is the beginning of wisdom. The most essential characteristic of scientific technique is that it proceeds from experiment, not from tradition. Every man, wherever he goes, is encompassed by a cloud of comforting convictions, which move with him like flies on a summer day. We have, in fact, two kinds of morality side by side, one which we preach but do not practice, and another which we practice but seldom preach. We all have a tendency to think that the world must conform to our prejudices. The opposite view involves some effort of thought, and most people would die sooner than think in fact they do so. The great majority of men and women, in ordinary times, pass through life without ever contemplating or criticizing, as a whole, either their own conditions or those of the world at large. Without effort and change, human life cannot remain good. It is not a finished utopia that we ought to desire, but a world where imagination and hope are alive and active. Even when all the experts agree, they may well be mistaken. Good reasons must, of force, give place to better. The unexamined life is not worth living. False words are not only evil in themselves, but they infect the soul with evil. The advantage of the incomprehensible is that it never loses its freshness. Strengthen the female mind by enlarging it, and there will be an end to blind obedience. The appetites will rule if the mind is vacant. I must be allowed to add some explanatory remarks to bring the subject home to reason, to that sluggish reason, which supinely takes opinions on trust, and obstinately supports them to spare itself the labor of thinking. Some women govern their husbands without degrading themselves, because intellect will always govern. The mind will ever be unstable that has only prejudices to rest on. One original thought is worth 1,000 mindless quotings.